Conny Lenneberg, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you, Daniel.
Conny, we're in a strange time as everybody can recognise. And we've had a period of perhaps economic growth, and then COVID-19 hit late last year, and the impact has been this year. How's the Brotherhood going in general terms around that?
Yeah, well, I think we all feel like we've woken up into a parallel universe, don't we? Yeah. We saw the early indications of the illness emerging, and we started having the first news really in January from Wuhan in China. And you could see people getting more alarmed with how it was spreading, but who would have, in their wildest imaginations, dreamt that within a few months we'd all be locked down in our homes with instructions and, in fact, fines if we move around in ways that are not sanctioned. I mean, none of us could have believed that that could possibly happen. I've been very fortunate to see that governments, both state and federal, have responded really very generously in looking at what the impact is for those that are most disadvantaged. So it's been extraordinary. We've been campaigning for years about New Start being wholly inadequate, being a barrier to employment. We've had bankers and economists and ordinary citizens and human rights lawyers and everybody say this is unfair, it's a barrier, it's cruel, it's impossible, deaf ears. And suddenly, like the Berlin Wall, this came and it fell down. You know, we doubled New Start. We made childcare free. Suddenly then we realised that we not only can, but we must respond, that we have a responsibility as a community to look after those that have been left behind and to ensure that everyone has a basic economic security so they don't have to be hungry and they don't have to be worried about being evicted in the next week.
Yeah. It's an interesting point in the conversation, Conny, to invite you to share the Brotherhood's mission or vision, which I think speaks right into that heart.
It does. So the Brotherhood of St Laurence's vision is for an Australia free of poverty, and our mission is that all people in this country have a right to participate in social, economic and civic life. And we see that we all should have the opportunity to contribute our talents and to share in the prosperity that comes from that in a nation, and that we treat each other with dignity and respect. My hope is that through this crisis, we do hang on to that new understanding that we're all vulnerable. Life can happen in ways that we don't expect, which can take away the certainties, and that we as a community can feel good and affirmed in saying we look after each other. We are in this together, not just in the pandemic, but we're in this together always and for all time. I think the other thing in a crisis is your work becomes immediately apparent, so you know the value of what you're doing, and we can make a difference by making sure that the essential work that we do continues to be delivered to the community that needs it. And so I've seen the team at all levels of the organisation do extraordinary work, working really long hours, showing incredible commitment in order to figure out how do we adapt and how do we keep going and how do we improve while we're at it.
What are some of those things that you've had to do as a team, Conny, to adapt and improve?
It's been about how do you adapt those services as we've moved to remote, because it's all about personal connection. You know, service is about making a connection with the person, really understanding what their needs are and designing an approach that's appropriate to their needs. It's not about cookie cutters. You know, the struggle we're having with the internet today, how much harder for a family where English isn't their first language, or where they're really not used to technology and they're not sure how it all works. You know, how do you get that sense of connection, and how do you as a service provider make sure that you understand what the needs of that individual are? You know, our National Disability Insurance Service people working in local area coordination and working in early childhood development, they're trying remotely to figure out what's happening with this child or with this person with a disability, what are their particular needs, how can I be developing a plan with and for them that will allow them to live a fuller life. That just becomes immensely complicated through Zoom or over a telephone line. 2 years ago, we could not have done this. We simply did not have the capability to do that. So, you know, working with our partners to make sure that our organisation has got the capability that it can respond in an emergency and do things differently has been really important as well. The investments that we've made the last few years as part of a project we call Getting Fit for Purpose, which has been strengthening the internal organisation, making sure we're really clear about our strategy. All of that is standing us in very good stead as we're now going through this crisis. There are significant financial implications for the organisation. You have guaranteed tied funding through government services, but we fund our organisation and our innovation on the basis of the discretionary income we get, the investment income, the fee for service, the community support that we get, the philanthropic funds, and that's been really massively impacted. So being able to really understand what are the things that really make the organisation unique, thinking through how do we sustain that in times of financial challenges has been a really big learning for us, and really focusing in more on that.
What would be your views across the sector where perhaps it's a fair percentage of organisations that fail to return break even or a surplus, and the sustainability has been a challenge, and then you bring that context into a crisis like this?
I think this is a time of enormous disruption for community organisations, whether we're charities or social justice organisations. The way in which people are giving is changing. I've seen that while we've had this prosperity, we've also said we can't afford to give income support, and we've grown a whole lot of charities that are providing food security to people. And we have to ask ourselves, it's wonderful that they do that work, but is that really what's required, that people who are in need have to depend on charity in order to get food and to keep a roof over their heads? So I think we really need to rethink the values of this community and how much we rely on personal generosity to make sure that people's basic human rights are being met in this community.
What do you see as the most significant changes to the BSL organisation that have been thrust on us through this intense period of COVID that will last as permanent change?
I don't think any of us will return to the way it was. I think the shift we'll see is that we're a more agile organisation. We've got to be really contributing to that existential conversation about what is our role as a sector, but also that conversation in the community that says, what kind of community do we want to be? Out of every major crisis we've experienced, we've changed substantially, and we have the opportunity to reimagine what kind of Australian community do we want to be, and what kind of global community do we want to see. We've got the Sustainable Development Goals. We signed on to those. I hope that we will see in this next period a greater commitment to bring those goals to realisation. I want to see the BSL being more agile, focusing in on those goals being global and local, and seeing how do we bring a community along in an understanding that those aspirations are something worth working for, and it'll give us protection as well as joy in the future.
I'm glad that the internet was working then, Conny, because that's a powerful statement and an inspiring rally cry. So thank you.